Welcome one, welcome all to the Rochford Files with your host. That's kind of between the coast, but don't call Colorado the Midwest. It's Andrew Rochford, come to you live from the Mile Highland City on a somewhat somber Tuesday night around the United States of America. As always, I know that it'll take a bit for people to trickle into the chat, but as for today, I didn't expect, to have a show that I didn't really think that. I didn't even think I'd want to go live tonight, but given what's happened today, it's pretty important too, as we've just seen what's a common theme in the United States, the mass shooting, the home of mass shooting. It's ridiculous. And it's really all started since Columbine, a place that I wasn't familiar with until that shooting, and I'm even in the same state, and it's a suburb that I'm relatively close to, which I've now had multiple nephews now go to, so it's like definitely wild times that this dramatic change that we've gone to, and it's sick. But what the response has been every single time. But it's not going to be the normal liberal response that you normally hear during these shootings, because on the left it's a different perspective to all this. But let's get some of the basic details across first before we point out some of the worst takes that conservatives and liberals alike have given us following this another tragic event. And let's just start here because up until about the last hour or so, we thought it was 14, but now it's 18. As Uvalde, Texas, an 18-year-old gunman fire Tuesday at an elementary school, killing at least 18 children, officials said, and the gunman was dead. The death toll also included 3 adults, according to State Senator Roland Gutierrez, who he said was briefed by state police on the fatalities, but was not immediately clear whether that number included the assailant. It was the deadliest shooting at a U.S. grade school since a gunman killed 20 children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut almost a decade ago, and it came just 10 days after a gunman in body armor killed 10 black shoppers and workers at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, in what authorities say was a racist attack. And that right, Sandy Hook is going to draw the most parallels to this event because that was another shooting that took place at an elementary school, and that was one where the powerful politicians ultimately decided to shrug their shoulders and do fucking nothing about it. Federal law enforcement officials say the death toll was expected to rise. They spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to release investigative details. The gunman entered Robb Elementary School in Uvalde with a handgun and possibly a rifle, Governor Greg Abbott said. Officials did not immediately reveal a motive, but the governor identified the assailant as Salvador Ramos and said he was a resident of the heavily Latino community about 85 miles west of San Antonio. A border patrol agent who was nearby when the shooting began rushed into the school without waiting for backup and shot and killed the gunman, who was behind a barricade, according to a law enforcement official speaking on condition of anonymity because he was not authorized to talk about it. The agent was wounded but was able to walk out of the school, a law enforcement source said. Abbott said the shooter was likely killed by police officers, but the events were still being investigated. The school's district police chief, Pete Arredondo, said the attack acted alone. The massacre of young children was another gruesome moment for a country scared by an almost ceaseless string of mass killings at churches, schools, and stores, and the prospects for any reform in the nation's gun regulations seem at least as dim in the aftermath as death. I think that right there pretty much gets us to the primary details of this case before we start to shift gears into the whole some of the worst takes that we've seen from this. And we got to start with this count first. Because we'll start here with this tweet from Code of Vets, who, by the way, is some random woman, and she quote tweeted a story on the shooting. Pray for the victims, families, and community. The killer was Salvador Ramos, 18 years old. Did he cross the border illegally? Our nation has a serious national security crisis involving. God help us. Can your God, by the way, help you with your deranged racism? Because in this country known as the United States of America, with three Ks at the end of it, by the way, is one where the influences of white supremacy can also transcend beyond the white race. And we don't know all the motivations for the shooter yet, but we know that it's going to be found in due time. They usually figure out there's usually going to be a story or two which reveals more of that, and you're not going to see it just yet. But they talk about people like this are the first to complain about liberals politicizing one of these shootings. And when you try to politicize it into this garbage immigration shit that these far right racists want, I consider that a more problematic form of politicizing an event than when your typical liberal asks for gun control after that. Hey, Kelly. Let's hear what she has to say. It was reported that the shooter bought two assault weapons on his 18th birthday. Today, he brought a rifle and a handgun. You can't buy a handgun in Texas if you are 21 unless it is a private sale. That's a good thing that you brought up, Kelly, because but at the same time, it's also going to be one of those facts that the right likes to manipulate as a way to be against gun control because, oh, it was bought illegally anyway. AWCSN. But this whole legal gun thing is pretty much not relevant to whether we ever want to make progress on the issue of this endemic of mass shooting that the United States has had for a long ass fucking time. And when you're like this piece of shit account like Code of Vets, diverting the issue to with your fucking dog whistles of immigration is surely not going to make shit any better. And if you want to, and that is definitely a far worse push to make following the shooting instead of gun control. At least with gun control, when someone pushes that, their heart is in a better place than when you're want to use a shooting to push for harsher immigration, for a immigration system that even when Democrats control it is still not humane or compassionate in the way that it should be. Yeah, WCSN. We're about to uh, point out the empty thoughts and prayers soon on this. Soon. But this is a part of the problem. Good point, Kelly. Good point. He's he functions half-assed staff to begin with, and this is and you're going to see the right agenda on this uh, in the way of pushing for harsher immigration policies, even though Joe Biden is already pretty fucking harsh on immigration when you figure out a way to become harsher at the border than Donald Trump. And there's also a good argument that the man that he was vice president under, Barack Obama, was also even quietly harsher in terms of immigration than Donald Trump, the man that they threw a hissy fit over, and they managed to get one of the cages closed, rightfully so. But the problem is, they were silent as church mouses the moment when Biden opened that back up. But when you look back at the Parkland shooting, that shooter, he also had a Spanish name as well. But the difference is, he was known to have more conservative tendencies. So they couldn't push this whole harsher immigration brown scare tactic that they would like to in any situation like that, or their anti-black dog whistles, xenophobia, you name it, whenever the shooter isn't white. Yeah, it always has to be mentioned when uh, this stuff goes into immigration. He was the one that started the cages, and he's the one that currently has the record. But I bet that Biden has a pretty damn good shot at breaking that. And yes, this is going to lead me to talking to about Republicans more than I normally like to because Republican governor, one of the most well-known Republican senators in the country. So a tweet got brought up from Governor Greg Abbott's past, a pretty bad one at that. And here it is. This was back on October 28th, 2015. And he said, I'm embarrassed. Texas is number 2 in the nation for new gun purchases behind California. Let's pick up the pace, Texans. And he added an R and A. And this is the other aspect of how toxic tribalism is. And playing on the culture war when you consider it a far higher priority to want your state to have the most guns. Be right back. Well, sorry, had a near call for a sneeze before pulling up this Greg Abbott tweet. Then my nose got all stuffy. Weird how that works. But and this is where the how far apart that serious people on the left are compared to those who are fully immersed in the right wing culture war because we are using this moment to push for better social safety nets, including a healthcare system which can not target people who need the mental health that can hopefully prevent future mass shooters from happening. Also, ones that can help make it easier on families to not have to work 2, 3 jobs and actually be able to be more involved in children's lives of that way they don't get neglected because of the common lone wolf that you get from the whole theme that you generally hear about when it comes to these younger mass shooters. And this is where we are not alike. How about being number one in people covered? Interesting, Kelly. She says she lives in a rural county and have many friends that hunt. They are responsible gun owners, don't hunt with assault weapons, nor for mental health background checks. Yes, there are some small things that can be done right now. But the problem is, when you get down to it, we are not in the right place as a country to where we can actually push for real gun control, because it's the elite and the powerful who still have a disproportionate amount of guns on their hands. And we know that any type of gun control push that would help happen right now would only hurt uh, the diverse coalition of the working class, especially marginalized communities first. And I will say that that was one of the more worst liberal takes that I had when it came to my past responses to mass shootings. But this is where one of my biggest evolvements has been, because now I'm to a point where I'm now pushing harder for social safety nets, because it'll be far easier to implement a when you consider a lot of the things that haven't been done for the left in this country. It'll be much easier in comparison to push for a nationalized healthcare system, which has some of the best emphasis on mental health, far better than what we have in place right now. And then also uh, thriving wages. That way, people can only have to work one job. So there's a lot that can be done in comparison to a, a fruitless endeavor of trying to uh, seize guns from people. Because I think the gun issue is another wedge issue that the elite are going to use on you in order to keep you divided from your neighbors, and try to work together to achieve some tangible change for the working class. And let's go to the next Texas Republican stooge, and that would be Ted Cruz. It's weird how often WCSN that they forget about the fact that, or completely ignorant of the 2010 supermajority, and they sat on their hands and didn't do shit. But I thought this was one of the best responses, and this is from Nick Cruz of Revolutionary Blackout Network to the tweet of Ted Cruz, which I'll read first. Heidi and I are fervently lifting up in prayer the children and families in the horrific shooting in Uvalde. We are in close contact with local officials, but the precise details are still unfolding. Thank you to heroic law enforcement and first responders for acting so swiftly. And Nick, I want to thank the heroic law enforcement officers that did nothing to prevent this from happening. And just like last week when I had Uncle Warren on the show, we talked a lot about the Buffalo shooting. We pointed back to many instances where law enforcement actually failed us on many of these shootings. Like, for example, I know a few of these shootings that these mass shooters are actually being tipped off beforehand to the FBI and their local law enforcement, and they sat on their hands and didn't take shit seriously. Then I know that with the Buffalo shooter last week, that guy was uh, held in mental health for a day and a half when it was learned that he planned to do a try to meditate a high school shooting. And this also goes to the Parkland shooting, because I believe in that one there was an officer who was too cowardly to step in and try to be the good guy with the gun. Then I believe that one led to an example that Nick often brings up when it comes to the failures of the police state in this country is the fact that when they tried to take them to court, the the court argued that the officers had no obligation to protect you. And this goes to show that the failure of the police state right here is the fact that they do not prevent these shootings from happening, and how batshit garbage they are when it comes to preventing crime, which, by the way, they're only able to prevent just 2% of crime. That's all they can really do. And the reason why it's important to bring up officers is because what liberals don't think about is they want the unintended consequence of them advocating for gun control is that it leads us to being an actual police state where they're the only ones with the means of protection while the people lack their basic means of protection. And this is actually where conservatives get that shit half right. But the problem is, oh, another thing that Nick has brought up well is their hypocrisy on Don't Tread On Me. Is the truth is, if they were really serious about that, they'd be for a small police force and taking some of the overloaded police funding and using it towards things like education, healthcare, mental health, things like that. But this goes to show you how piss poor the concept of police are in this country. Because if they want this, they almost never have a moment where they come through and justify the concept of police in this country. Because look at all the schools that have armed security in the United States. I mean, I'm sure that if you're from the post Columbine era of going to school, that you've probably had some form of an armed security presence in your school. And I also know at the same time, there's going to be liberals who are pushing for an increased security presence at their school. And that is not the answer either, because what what learned over time is the students actually feel more scared at the thought of having armed security, you know, the mag the magnet checkers that you'd have to walk through a lot like airports and sporting events, because simulates more of the prison state in places that we should be more free. Next up, we've got uh, a tweet from uh, MVP, the professional wrestler here. By the way, he has a very good TED Talks. As you know, before he actually used to be in jail, but he actually uh, came a long way from that and turned his life around after he got out, including when he got into the wrestling business. So, yeah, I do recommend that TED Talk. And I also know he's a independent lefty like many of us here. But before I read that tweet from MVP, let's see this. Yep, Kelly, gun control is a issue like abortion and religion. Congress doesn't want to face the fact that if we had good jobs, educational opportunities, access to free healthcare, there would be less. And that's a thing that, as I mentioned, I learned uh, I was wrong about pushing gun control on because that was one of the worst liberal things I used to do. And the last part would be mass shootings. And the tweet from MVP: I live in Texas. My baby boy goes to school here. I don't know what the fuck I would do if anything so vile and senseless happened to him. I would lose my shit, I'm sure. Thoughts and prayers are worthless to those dead kids and their parents, siblings, and loved ones. And that's where we need more of these fucking politicians to get their heads out of their asses here. Because even though you'll, it's a pretty damn bipartisan saying to go to thoughts and prayers. But where me and MVP align are, we're both atheists. So both of us are pretty antagonistic to the thoughts, the empty thoughts and prayers that a lot of people throw out in these moments like this. Because for me, I am very action based. And thoughts and prayers, as we've seen over these last 23 plus years, are pretty fucking worthless. And all we've really had to show anytime that the gun control becomes a temporary debate is just a bunch of grandstanding from Democrats and Republicans alike. And this also goes to the point of how too many people, this is a lot like the policing issue. It's illogical to think that social spending could actually be a better deterrent to crime than the idea of needing more people to watch over us. And similar here, the way to get us better protected from mass shooting is actually another thing that feels illogical to people is the same social safety nets. But either way, it cannot get back all the lives that we have lost over senseless bullshit over like this. But it can't prevent future ones. And we would like, but there's not really anyone that's actually serious about taking the debate in that direction. So, just to make it known, gotta be critical of Democrats in the situation as well. So, gotta show this little grandstanding moment from the Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy.
What are we doing? Why do you spend all this time running for the United States Senate? Why do you go through all the hassle of getting this job, of putting yourself in a position of authority? If your answer is that as this slaughter increases, as our kids run for their lives, we do nothing. What are we doing? Why are you here? If not to solve a problem as this. This isn't inevitable. These kids weren't unlucky. This only happens in this country and nowhere else. Nowhere else do little kids go to school thinking that they might be shot that day. Nowhere else do parents have to talk to their kids, as I have had to do, about why they got locked into a bathroom and told to be quiet for 5 minutes just in case a bad man entered that building. Nowhere else does that happen except here in the United States of America, and it is a choice. It is our choice to let it continue. What are we doing? In Sandy Hook Elementary School, after those kids came back into those classrooms, they had to adopt a practice in which there would be a safe word that the kids would say if they started to get thoughts in their brain about what they saw that day. If they started to get nightmares during the day, reliving stepping over their classmates' bodies as they tried to flee the school. In one classroom, that word was monkey. And over through the day, kids would stand up and yell, monkey. And a teacher or a paraprofessional would have to go over to that kid, take them out of the classroom, talk to them about what they had seen, work them through their issues. Sandy Hook will never, ever be the same. This community in Texas will never, ever be the same. Why? Why are we here? If not to try to make sure that fewer schools and fewer communities go through what Sandy Hook has gone through, what Uvalde is going through. Our heart is breaking for these families. Every ounce of love and thoughts and prayers we can send, we are sending. But I'm here on this floor to beg, to literally get down on my hands and knees and beg my colleagues. Find a path forward here. Work with us to find a way to pass laws that make this less likely. I understand my Republican colleagues will not agree to everything that I may support, but there is a common denominator that we can find. There is a place where we can achieve agreement that may not guarantee that America never, ever again sees a mass shooting, that may not overnight cut in half the number of murders that happen in America. It will not solve the problem of American violence by itself, but by doing something, we at least stop sending this quiet message of endorsement to these killers whose brains are breaking, who see the highest levels of government doing nothing, shooting after shooting.
So see what I mean about the grandstanding that is taking place. Can someone tell me how many years this Chris Murphy guy has been a senator for? And how many times we've gone through this mass shooting cycle where we talk about it for a few days, gets a lot of attention as a national debate. Congress sits on their hands, does nothing, even if it's something that is counterproductive to the type of stuff that me and people who support uh, the indie left type media would be asking for. And as much as conservatism gets the popular blame for the endemic of mass shootings, neoliberalism has helped him a whole damn lot. Yes, that's right, Leah Neely. America is absolutely one of the biggest terrorist states in the world, and it can make anyone uh, that type of person. And so often that we've seen these situations, and it's not always the same damn Democrat who has the notable grandstanding speech on the Congress floor. It just happened to be Chris Murphy this time, but he is one of those longtime senators uh, who's part of the problem of the complicity of taking any type of action or response to doing anything to make anything change. Before I tongue twist myself so often with anything. And it's because it's designed to only keep you focused on gun control. Because they know that gun control is a issue that they can't move on. Because if you ask for something different, oh, yes, I know that there were plenty more of those type of moments. But I think Chris Murphy's was probably the most standout among those. But it's even worse. Now it's time to go shift gears to a tweet from Matthew Y. Glacius. And for those of you who don't know, the Y stands for why the fuck does this man have such a large platform? For all its very real problems, one shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the contemporary United States of America is one of the best places to live in all of human history. And there's a reason tons of people of all kinds from all around the world clamor to move here. And of course, it's a fucking liberal who uses this moment to push American exceptionalism when the reality is the United States of America is really a mediocre country when you get into the advanced metrics of it. Look at how far fucking behind we are in terms of healthcare, education, wages. need to say the least on that. And you know why, even in spite of the issues that America has, being a capitalist hellhole, that we still continue to get a lot of people coming in from all over the world? And it's because at least you know here, for all the problems that the United States has, that you're probably not going to be a victim of the war, sanctions, or imperialism. That is about the only valid reason to move here, is because you're not very likely to fall victim to another country's attacks. But keep that in mind. There is plenty of domestic danger that comes with being here in the United States due to how poorly the citizens get cared for here. And yes, that is absolutely a failure of the powerful in this country. And it is not one to blame on people in a primary sense for when they get frustrated that they are not getting their basic needs met. And of course, this major shitlib account right here is one of those who always uses moments like these to try to push the American exceptionalism back onto us. You know how well that went for Hillary Clinton when she said America was already great, when the reality is that America has never felt great to so many people in this in marginalized communities who have been more than willing to acknowledge that reality their whole lives. While for some, it's just been a recent revelation. Before this game four between the uh, Golden State Warriors and Dallas Mavericks, which is happening right now, and on the TV right in front of me, right over this laptop, as I'm streaming to y'all live, Steve Kerr had another notable presser moment following this shooting. So, since I am also a highlight instances of sports and politics, it's important that Steve Kerr's uh, moment from his presser earlier gets included into this.
In Southern California, and now we have children murdered at school. When are we going to do something? I'm tired. I'm so tired of getting up here and offering condolences to the devastated families that are out there. I'm so tired of the, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm tired of the moments of silence. Enough. There's 50 senators right now who refuse to vote on H.R. 8, which is a background check rule that the House passed a couple of years ago. It's been sitting there for 2 years. And there's a reason they won't vote on it, to hold on to power. So I ask you, Mitch McConnell, I ask all of you senators who refuse to do anything about the violence and school shootings and supermarket shootings, I ask you, are you going to put your own desire for power ahead of the lives of our children and our elderly and our churchgoers? Because that's what it looks like. It's what we do every week. So I'm fed up. I've had enough. We're going to play the game tonight, but I want every person here, every person listening to this to think about your own child or grandchild, or mother or father or sister, brother. How would you feel if this happened to you today? We can't get numb to this. We can't sit here and just read about it and go, well, let's have a moment of silence. Yeah, go Dubs. Come on, Mavs, let's go. That's what we're going to do. We're going to go play a basketball game. And 50 senators in Washington are going to hold us hostage. You realize that 90% of Americans, regardless of political party, want background check, universal background check. 90% of us, we are being held hostage by 50 senators in Washington who refuse to even put it to a vote, despite what we, the American people, want. They won't vote on it because they want to hold on to their own power. It's pathetic. I've had enough.
So for the record, I do consider Steve Kerr's speech here to be more genuine, even if I think that there's some aspects of this that he's off base on. The difference between the left and liberals like Steve is when it comes to our concept of trying to push for things that we want, if this idea of the Congress is supposed to work our way, it goes back to what got pushed and forced the vote. It's trying to push the people closest to us to fight harder for us. And that's where your average liberal is more off base, because they still put their focus on the Republicans. And when Steve Kerr says that there's 50 senators who are more interested in holding their power, I'll argue that's a full 100 senators that are interested in maintaining their power, plus the 437 House representatives who are also interested in holding their power. And how I think that it's more productive to push those who are closest to where you are, rather than trying to go after those who are further away from where you are. And plus, when you get into the concept of chain of command, it makes sense to have the like-minded, powerful, in theory, challenge those who are their adversaries. But overall, yes, it is. I can definitely sense the frustration here. Another thing I wanted to touch on is the fact that he said we're going to have a moment of silence. Then it's go Dubs, go Mavs. But once again, think about it. This could have been a moment that reignited the NBA strike. Even if they don't make the right ask, this could have been a moment where, if we had our athletes in sports restart the strike, think about it. Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals. What better time since the bubble in 2020 would it have been to reignite the spark of a strike? And since these two teams took the floor after your moment of silence, they threw away an opportunity to restart the strike. They absolutely could have done it, because if they actually stopped an NBA playoffs where you have full crowds of fans going to those games, and if that had started tonight, then the Boston Celtics and Miami Heat would be following suit the following night. Now, guess what? NHL's playoffs, they're coming to a stop too. Then the next in line, MLB would have to get on board with it. But no, we're getting back to too normal to think about going on strike. Wonder which powerful neoliberal would have stepped in if anyone even thought to use this moment to get a strike. Because if Steve Kerr wanted to back up some of those words that he had said in that moment, he would have gone right back into that Warriors locker room and asked his team, who's on board with me? We need to start that strike again. Oh. I think, Leah, I think a lot of lefties have been begging for some socialist country to come in and stage a coup on us. But next, this is going to transition over to voting now, because some liberals are going to push down even harder on the concept of voting. Plus, a couple of days ago, Luke Campbell, who was once of Two Live Crew, also posed that question to the black community. So those are the next couple of things coming up. But first off, look what comes up first. One of the top tweets from Stephen King: 2-day Twitter outrage doesn't cut it. When you step into the voting booth this fall, vote gun control. And that's where liberals and the left are so far offline. Because we could say that only having outrage online doesn't cut it, but we need to step in the streets. If we were talking about filling up the streets like France does every so often when their politicians try to do shit that they don't like, then we would be in a much better mindset to try to fight back against our rigged two-party duopoly. But now it's time to get to Oh yeah, this is the part, Kelly, of why our elections are a joke, because these privately owned rigged machines have no transparency. But when you see these countries in the global south who have far more transparency in their elections, but the United States calls it dictatorship when those people elect a socialist government because they got upset because they didn't elect their puppet fascist that they wanted to see take over. But yes, this is the big discussion that happened over voting with Luke Campbell, one half of Two Live Crew. He said, "Give me 5 reasons why black people should vote in the next election. Give me 5 black promises that have been fulfilled by politicians in the last election, mayor and president." And this is a damn good question to be asking. And I know that some people try to attack the person for asking the question because he has a net worth of 8 million. Does that invalidate the question being asked at hand? Is it because he used to support some Republican candidates? That still doesn't invalidate the question. Yes, Leah. This is the point where once we have enough people who want to do that here, that's when I know we are starting to get serious around here. But let's dive down to the replies. And here's Jamal Bowman, who couldn't even make it a day before showing us what a fraud he was. He said, number one, the ARP made historic investments in black school districts. Two, Ketanji Brown Jackson, who, by the way, is a anti-worker justice. I am the first black man to hold this seat in U.S. history. The ARP cut black child poverty of 34%. And last, he said, authorizing historic investment in minority business development. And Sabby Sabs came in. Stop the virtue signaling. You've done nothing to help the American people. You couldn't even force the vote during a pandemic. Good one. Yes, I'm about to make that point how uh, ineffectively that most of these people actually answered the tweet. And yes, by the way, even though I didn't, even though I didn't really uh, like the interview on my end, I did have Sabby on last year in July. If you like to see it, it wasn't. It was still back when I was using that Haps app, so it wasn't like great quality on my front, but I still had Sabby on last year. But the main person I wanted to focus on was Jamel Hill. Of course, she is one of those uh, major, one of the most politically engaged voices in the sports world, and based on what she's saying, it's a pretty easily debunkable arguments. And her first two are Black people should vote because you pay taxes in this system and should have some say into how that system works. Who invests money into something and then says, I don't care what you do with my money? So, with all this endless money that the government pulls out of their ass to continuously throw more money into war, if we really had that type of say, then we would be able to stop a lot of that money from being bled into war. But since we really don't have a say how tax spender money gets spent, this logic is very, very faulty, because if we actually got to vote on major issues like funding and spending, then your argument would begin to hold weight. But since by and large we don't really have much of a say in how the money gets spent, especially since 538 people plus all the corporations and the other rich lobbyists who can buy out the politicians, we don't have the influence. There is nothing we can accomplish without political engagement. Here's the problem with that. Jamel, you think political engagement only comes at the ballot box. We're here trying to get people to change the way they engage with politics, like the direct action, something that France, as I've just recently referenced to, very good at the direct action aspect. Also, I consider mutual aid a very good way to politically engage with helping people in a more direct way than throwing away $10 to some random politician who isn't going to follow through on any of the fucking promises that they're going to campaign on. Kelly, Jamel, I didn't have any say in over 50% of each of my tax dollars going to the military and industrial complex. Exactly. Exactly. Next. Let's find number 3 from her. I'm just going to go back, click to her profile. Good old tweets and replies. For number 3. Damn, she tweets a lot. By not voting, you're creating a lack of accountability for bad politicians. It's actually quite the opposite, Jamel. You create a lack of accountability by unconditionally giving politicians your vote without withholding your vote, telling them you have to earn it. That's how far gone we are from the concept of voting working for us. When you have all these blue check liberals pushing for vote blue no matter who, all you're doing is doing even worse lack of accountability than the not voting thing that you say creates it. Because even if I'm not sure how being committed third party voters would work out, you're at least starting to try to hold politicians accountable who aren't doing anything to improve your lives. For our elders and ancestors were killed for this right. Black people helped turn America into a democracy. It's disrespectful to our history and lineage to not engage. See, this is where I have a different interpretation of what I've learned. If anything, I've learned that some of the great black revolutionaries that we have, like Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, Martin Luther King Jr., even though MLK was more into electoralism than those other two, is that it's disrespectful to their history and lineage to not engage in direct action, mobilizing in mass. Sure, because when you look back at most of the victories that uh, the left has gotten, including voting and women's rights, they involved an element of direct action. It didn't come exclusively from the ballot box, like a lot of these liberals like to falsely imply it does. Then our last point, not inviting incubates and spreads authoritarianism. And this is another tweet that is misunderstanding uh, the ignorance of how rigged our system is. Because look in the extreme uh, hard red and deep blue areas and think about what it creates. Look at New York. Do you think Eric Adams is really a genuine Democrat? No, he's a classic Republican who has to run Democrat or else he would never have a chance of uh, being an elected office in a deep blue state like New York. However, if he's in South Carolina, he's like a clone of Tim Scott. And that, or look at uh, Mitch McConnell, for example. If Mitch McConnell is in California, he's definitely a Democrat. If Chuck Schumer's in Alabama, he's easily a longtime Republican. If Nancy Pelosi is in Utah, definitely a Republican. And the point is, two wings of the same bird who work to accomplish the same interest. And if you've been paying attention to everything that Joe Biden has done since he has taken office and think that he hasn't further spread authoritarianism, what rock have you been living under? Let's go back to the original thread here because there's some also notable things to pick apart. And you see a lot of these random liberal accounts with the blue and yellow flag, who mainly big theme was pointing to symbolism. Then next, you also see a common theme is a lot of black people in the comments who uh, cannot get themselves to think outside the electoralism box. And that's something that everyone across the board has a pretty big problem with. But the reason why it's more magnified in the black community is because they have gotten the least of anyone from electoralism. Got to point out another good one from Anthony Clark. The system was created by the oppressors voting as part of that system. If a game is rigged, choosing a different team or picking a different coach doesn't change the outcome of that game. Our people need to move beyond voting and fight this system. And that's a great point right there. And we need more people to fight outside the system. Even if you still try to make the third party vote thing, push for some down ballot stuff that can improve things locally. We got to get out of this red blue game and start to fight the system a different way. And in a reply, he's actually showing that he's seeing his community not change by saying, sorry, let's find someone that's not bullshitting us. Have you drove through the black community lately? And I think that you live through just the last 14 years at minimum. That's like the smallest sample size you could use to point an example of how shit hasn't changed. And also a good video of Lawrence O'Donnell, who admitted that Democrats won't listen to you unless you're willing to withhold your vote. Then a big theme of it was also Republican boogeyman was often a big argument, like they're the ones who are actually going to take their voting rights away. But what's compelling about fighting against the bad voting, someone who's rolling back voting access when you've got a party who sat on their hands and won't do anything about it? And of course, crazy that we are at a point in history where the Me So Horny guy is the most feasible voice in the house. Oh. What's ironic about that is I looked over my laptop and also saw that the second half to this Mavericks and Warriors game is being delayed due to a leak in the roof. So if there's a good metaphor for that leak in the roof, give them to me in the chat. But overall, it's very, very flawed reasoning, which is such a huge theme that liberals have been giving you. And that many of the past things that they cite back to are often ones that didn't even come exclusively through voting. And it's going to be a debate that needs to be uh, done, because if I had the platform for it, I would have tried to get uh, Luther Luke Campbell on, along with some people who still haven't let go of the belief of electoralism, and try to uh, hash out a good debate over it. Even though it feels like it's already happened a lot, but we still haven't made the progress on it to where we aren't paralyzed by the idea of electoralism. And I think that's what has still happened. And a lot of that has to do with the propaganda you're getting with this. Because every 2 to 4 years, most important election of your life, and that gets the frenzy going instead of being able to break through and not fall victim to that fear monger. Once we start to not fear the consequences of whatever could arise from not voting a certain way, it is when we have a chance to be on the offensive for once. Good point, Kelly. A leak in the roof is a convenient way to avoid striking in solidarity the parents of the murdered children today. If anything, that leak in the roof should be a message that you should probably leave, and you'd still have a chance to start that strike in the first place. You may have missed starting the strike before the game, but maybe you would have gotten a bit more people's attention if you already had them sit through a half of basketball. Then you decide during halftime that you're not going to come out and start the strike. But lastly, for tonight's show, this is going to be in relation to Nazem Kadri, the of the Colorado Avalanche, who had uh, been through a lot of racist attacks from St. Louis Blues fans over the weekend because of a play that he was involved in that took out the Blues goalie Bennington in Game 3, even though he was not exactly directly at fault in just a unfortunate play where it was actually the goalie's own teammate who was a greater cause for Bennington being out for the rest of that series, which the Avalanche now lead 3-1. So, someone from the Kadri family showed some of the examples of the attacks that they had gotten after following Game 3 on Saturday. And this is from Nazem Kadri's wife. And for those of you who don't know or don't really follow hockey, Nazem Kadri is a Muslim hockey player for the Colorado Avalanche who is having a career year and is probably on his way to a big payday. Uh, I don't really know. I didn't really look much into it. I know Herschel Walker cruised to his primary victory today. Then I guess the from the Walker campaign party, they had the Biden speech playing that he did, and they booed, and there was visible booing through moments of that speech. Not that I think it's that important to go to Biden's speech tonight, because other than the small 20-second sound bites, when you get into longer form speech, they get pretty mundane. But yeah, let's uh, show you some of the examples of the racist attacks that Nazem Kadri got. But to before I really start there, uh, before Game 4 yesterday, local law enforcement in St. Louis had to provide extra security for Kadri before entering the their arena last night. But I'll show you some examples of these racist attacks. Oh yeah, they'll be too hard to read on screen for you, but he had people threaten his life. All over Instagram. The so very extremely problematic Islamophobia and racism that came from this just unfortunate play. And this even led to when when his wife exposed a few of the attacks that Nazem Kadri got from this, their family started to get attacked more, which is the even more fucked up part. And this is where, for me, as someone who does watch sports, this is where shit goes too far. Even if you feel like Kadri deserves some blame for that injury in that play, the problem is this shows you how too much seriously we take sports when you allow a unfortunate consequence of the game, which all injuries really are, turn you into racist pieces of shit. That's when you know you take this sport too seriously. There are far more pressing issues in society rather than to let it turn you into a deranged piece of shit like that who has to send threatening, disgusting messages to their families members, not just directly to that athlete. Then, to make it even worse, having the audacity to threaten their life over it. This is where these people have always sickened me. because even though, yes, it's nice when your team can win, but it always goes way too fucking far when it leads to seriously threatening athletes' lives and saying shit that crosses the lines of like racism, homophobia, Muslim phobic, xenophobic, you name the discriminatory language, which is problematic. And that's where it just goes too far. But there's a good news to the story, at least in one aspect. Nazem Kadri got a hat trick last night in Game 4. In midst of dealing with all those threats and hate, he went out on the ice last night and got a hat trick in the Avalanche's 6-3 victory against the St. Louis Blues. And guess what? There was even a moment in that game multiple Blues players took cheap shots at Kadri. And guess what? He did not let that get him out of the game. Instead, he responded by making a count on the scoreboard because I believe he scored all three of his goals after those cheap shots in the second period where he went off. So that right there is an example of what you can do when you stay focused and keep your eyes on the prize. Sure, it'd be nice to get one in on your exact direct avenge, but when you actually focus on the task at hand, you could still get tangible stuff done. And the one analogy I like to point as a connection to it is like, for example, the white supremacist groups like Proud Boys. We could be more focused on those, but if you focus on the white supremacists in suits, you're far more likely to get more tangible change. And that right there is an example, just on a smaller scale, of what happens when you don't let yourself get uh, lost in the sauce, so to speak. So, thanks so much to all of you for coming out for tonight's edition of the Rochford Files, hosted by Andrew Rochford. As always, please like, share, and try to help get new subscribers, or subscribe if you're new here as well. That also includes other platforms like Twitch, Odyssey, and Rumble. And with also, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at NugLifeComrade, as you see below on the screen. That'll be the first place I make updates in relation to the Rochford Files. And actually don't have any upcoming guests planned as of right now. So, gotta get to work on that. In addition to, I do have an upcoming panel idea up my sleeves. Another thing I still have to get to work on is before I had a recent string of good guests. That was a constant thing with me telling y'all how I constantly need to work on that, but I come back each show. with no work done. And I did have a couple classes in school like that, even though I was a decent student. Yes, Kelly, have a good night. You too, WCSN and Leah Neely. This is Andrew Rochford saying goodbye and good night.